Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Chained Opinion Podcast. Today, we are going to take a deep look into the big, powerful airstrike that President Trump ordered against the Houthi rebels over in Yemen.
It's been a pretty hot topic, hasn't it? Lots to unpack here.
Definitely is. So we'll be looking at, all the details of the attack itself and what different experts are saying. And, of course, think about what this might all mean, for everyone involved. We know that at least 31 people have been reported killed and over 100 injured just in the initial strike. And that's according to Mike Waltz, the White House National Security Advisor.
Right. So let's rewind a bit to the very beginning. President Trump actually announced this whole thing on Saturday, March 15th on his Truth Social account.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, and he called it decisive and powerful military action against, quote, Houthi terrorists in Yemen, end quote. He also accused them of, well, he used some strong words. He said they've been on an unrelenting campaign of piracy, violence, and terrorism, and that this was all directed at American ships, along with ships from other countries, aircraft, and even drones.
Wow. He didn't just stop at the Houthis, though, right? He also called out Iran pretty directly.
Exactly. He basically told Iran to stop supporting the Houthis right away. So he's making a pretty clear connection between what Iran's doing and what's happening with the rebels.
And I seem to recall he had some pretty harsh words for how the previous administration handled things.
Oh, absolutely. In that same Truth Social post, he went after former President Biden, saying Biden was pathetically weak in dealing with these Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. And then he claimed, get this, that no U.S. commercial ship had sailed safely through the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, or the Gulf of Aden in over a year.
That's a big statement to make. And didn't he also mention something about an attack on a U.S. warship?
Yeah, he did. He said a U.S. warship had been attacked, get this, over a dozen times just 4 months ago, and he kept hammering on the Iran connection, saying these Houthi attacks funded by Iran have cost the U.S. and the world economy billions and billions of dollars and put countless innocent lives at risk. So he's painting a pretty dire picture for sure.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it. Now, after Trump made that announcement, we heard from his national security advisor, Mike Waltz. He talked about the airstrike on ABC News.
Yeah, that's right. Waltz called this operation the largest military operation of Trump's second term, and he said it was meant as a direct warning to Iran. He was really trying to draw a line between these strikes and the way things were handled before.
What did he say was so different about this approach?
Well, he called the previous attacks pinprick attacks, back and forth. Basically, he said they were ineffective. But this time, he claimed it was an overwhelming response that actually took out multiple Houthi leaders. And he kept coming back to two main points. One, that they were going after the Houthi leadership directly. And two, that they were holding Iran responsible for what the Houthis were doing. So basically, the White House wants everyone to see this as a much stronger, more decisive move.
Right, a more direct and forceful approach. So with all that happening, what are some of the experts saying?
Well, the Atlantic Council, they got together a bunch of their experts to weigh in, and one guy, Daniel E. Mouton, he brought up something really interesting. He talked about how between 2015 and 2022, the Saudi-led coalition, they launched a huge number of airstrikes against the Houthis, and they were using really advanced weapons, even getting some indirect help from the U.S.
That's a long time and a lot of firepower.
Exactly. But the thing is, the Houthis, they didn't just survive, they actually got even stronger and bolder with their attacks. So for you, it raises the question, do airstrikes really work in the long term? What's the point if they just bounce back stronger?
Right. Years of attacks from a powerful coalition, and it didn't stop them. So what does Mouton think that means for what's happening now?
Well, he thinks these new airstrikes, they probably won't deter the Houthis either, especially with Iran still backing them up.
Yeah.
And they also get support from countries like China and Russia, with supplies and stuff. Mouton says the U.S. needs to try a bunch of different things, not just airstrikes. He suggests talking more with Russia and China to try to cut off that support. Then they need more ships to block the Houthis from getting supplies. And they need to put more pressure on Iran directly. And, maybe they even have to help Saudi Arabia and the UAE with their defenses because the Houthis have attacked them before, too. So he's saying just focusing on the military, it's not going to be enough.
It sounds like a really complex problem, more than just bombs and missiles. Who else did the Atlantic Council talk to?
So they also talked to Emily Milliken, and she thinks the Houthis will probably retaliate, probably against U.S. targets in the region. She even specifically mentioned the USS Truman Strike Group, that's in the Red Sea, or maybe U.S. bases. She thinks the Houthis have to do something to show they're not scared, both to their own people and to Iran. So for you, retaliation is pretty likely. You got to think about that.
Yeah, I can see why they would feel the need to make a statement, show they're not backing down. What about Danny Citrinovich? What's his take?
Citrinovich, he thinks this is a big change in strategy for the U.S. He pointed out that they're hitting Houthi leaders and weapons production sites directly inside Yemen, and he thinks that shows the U.S. is serious about supporting its allies in the region. But he also said this could lead to a more direct conflict between the U.S. and Iran, especially if the U.S. keeps thinking Iran's calling all the shots for the Houthis. So for you, this new strategy, it might be more effective, but it's definitely riskier.
So, going after the leaders directly, that could really escalate things. What about Osama al-Rawlani? What did he say?
He was pretty worried about the impact on regular people in Yemen. He said these bombings, even if they hurt the Houthis militarily, they're also really hurting civilians in Houthi-controlled areas, and that's most of Yemen. And he's concerned that this might make people resent the U.S. even more and actually help the Houthis get more support by playing the victim. He was saying it's not enough to just drop bombs. You have to think about the bigger picture, the smuggling, the politics, the economics, all the things that give the Houthis power. So he's really raising the question, is this even the right approach morally? And is it even going to work in the long run?
Yeah, he makes a good point. You can't ignore the human cost of all this. What about Alex Plitzis?
Well, he was pretty blunt. He said these strikes, they're probably the first of many. He said the Houthis aren't going to stop attacking ships. They're causing too much economic damage, and they're actually gaining more legitimacy, both inside Yemen and in the region, even with all the strikes against them. And he talked about how hard it is to actually stop them because their weapons are spread out. It's hard to get good intel, and Iran keeps helping them. So for you, he's saying, get ready for a long campaign. This isn't over.
Sounds like he expects a lot more fighting to come. What about Andrew Barine? What's his analysis?
He pointed out that the Houthis have really dug in western Yemen since 2015. I mean, they've been hit with airstrikes for years from all sides, but they're still there. And he talked about how important they are to what's called Iran's axis of resistance, which basically means they're a key part of this network of groups that Iran supports all across the Middle East. And he stressed how much they rely on Iran for weapons, training, even intelligence. He said that's what lets them go after commercial shipping so effectively. And he even compared this to how Trump was really aggressive towards Iranian-backed groups during his first term. So for you, it's not just about the Houthis, it's about this whole web of Iranian influence, and that makes them much tougher to deal with.
Wow, so it's part of this bigger regional power struggle. Okay, last expert from the Atlantic Council, Thomas S. Warwick. What did he have to say?
Warwick was really skeptical. He said, a few days of strikes won't stop the Houthis unless Trump is willing to do a lot more. He pointed out that when Biden tried more limited strikes, it didn't really work. He thinks the only way to make a difference is a sustained campaign that goes after both their leaders and their whole military capacity. So he agrees with some of the other experts that a few airstrikes here and there, it's not going to change anything fundamentally.
It sounds like the experts are pretty much in agreement that this is a complicated situation and a few bombs aren't going to solve it. So let's switch gears a little and talk about how the Houthis are responding to all this. Al Jazeera has been covering that pretty closely.
Right. So according to the Houthi-run health ministry, the death toll from the U.S. strikes has gone up to 53 people. That includes 5 children and 2 women, and they're saying 98 more people are injured. And their military spokesperson, Yahya Saree, he claimed they fired back, saying they hit the USS Harry S. Truman and other warships with 18 ballistic and cruise missiles and even a drone. Now, the U.S. hasn't confirmed any of this, so we have to be careful with those numbers. Saree also claimed the U.S. launched over 47 airstrikes across Yemen.
Those are some pretty serious claims. So what else is Al Jazeera saying about the Houthi perspective?
Well, Abdulmalik al-Houthi, the Houthi leader, he gave a televised speech, and he said they would retaliate against the American enemy with missile strikes and attacks on warships. He even brought up their efforts to disrupt Israeli shipping, saying they're doing that to try to force humanitarian aid into Gaza. And their political bureau went even further, calling the U.S. strikes a war crime. Al Jazeera also reported that the attacks hit Sana'a, the capital, and areas in Saada, Al-Baida, and Rada.
So they're not backing down at all. They're condemning the U.S., and they're saying they'll keep attacking ships. How has President Trump reacted to all this, the reported retaliation and the Houthi casualty figures?
Trump saying he'll use overwhelming lethal force until those Red Sea attacks stop. And the Houthis shot back, saying they'll keep their naval operation going until the blockade on Gaza is lifted and aid gets in. Then on Fox News, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the U.S. will keep striking until the Houthis stop targeting U.S. assets and global shipping. He made it pretty clear that this was also a warning to Iran. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio also chimed in, saying the U.S. military campaign will continue until the Houthis can't hit ships anymore. And of course, he blamed Iran for supporting them.
So both sides are really digging in. The U.S. is talking about a full-blown military campaign, and the Houthis are refusing to back down. Did Al Jazeera mention any other interesting perspectives?
Yeah, they talked to a former U.S. diplomat, Nabil Khouri, and he said Trump's making a mistake, that just a few weeks of bombing won't force the Houthis to surrender. He said diplomacy might be a better way to stop the shipping attacks. Then you have General Hossein Salami. He's the head of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And he flat out denied that Iran has anything to do with the Houthi attacks, even though the U.S. keeps accusing them.
Wow.
And the UN spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric, he called for everybody to calm down and stop fighting, saying this is just making things worse for the region and for the humanitarian situation in Yemen.
So the international community is getting pretty worried that this could turn into a bigger regional conflict. Let's see what Fox News had to say about all this. What were their main takeaways?
They had a senior defense official on, and he said U.S. warships had shot down about a dozen Houthi drones that were trying to hit the USS Truman carrier strike group. Apparently, they took them down long before they could get close enough to be a threat. So that kind of contradicts what the Houthis were saying about directly hitting the Truman.
So the U.S. military is saying they stopped those drones before they could do any harm. What else did Fox News report on?
Well, of course, they showed Trump's Truth Social post, where he talked about decisive and powerful military action and how dangerous and expensive the Houthi attacks are. And he gave this really strong warning. He said, to all Houthi terrorists, your time is up, and your attacks must stop, starting today. If they don't, hell will rain down upon you like nothing you have ever seen before. And then the White House released some photos of Trump, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, all watching the strikes unfold. And they put out a statement on X saying Trump's taking action to protect U.S. ships and stop the Houthis from threatening the U.S. economy and national security. So they're really trying to show that Trump is taking charge and acting tough.
Yeah, they're definitely pushing that narrative. Okay, what about AP News? What did they have to report on?
They basically confirmed what we already knew about the casualties. They said at least 31 people were killed in the strikes, including women and children, and more than 100 were wounded in Sana'a and Sada. And they confirmed that Trump's national security advisor said they got multiple Houthi leaders. They also reported on the Houthi claims about attacking the USS Harry S. Truman with missiles and a drone.
And what did the U.S. military say about those Houthi attacks, according to AP?
A U.S. official told them that the Houthis actually launched 11 drones and at least one missile. But they said U.S. Air Force jets shot down 10 of the drones, and a Navy F-A-18 got another one, and the missile just landed in the water, didn't hit anything. So it sounds like the U.S. defense systems worked pretty well. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio told CBS that the U.S. is doing the world a favor by attacking the Houthis, and he said they'll keep at it until the Houthis can't threaten shipping anymore. He was really making a point of saying this is different from what Biden did, more decisive and effective.
So they're really pushing that message, that this is a tougher approach than before. What did AP say about Iran's reaction?
Well, they said that Iran is denying any involvement in the Houthi attacks. General Hossein Salami, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, he said Iran has nothing to do with how those groups operate or what they do. And Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, he told the U.S. to stop the airstrikes and said they can't tell Iran what to do. AP also confirmed that the USS Harry S. Truman and the USS Georgia, that's a cruise missile submarine, were both involved in this operation. And a Houthi spokesperson, Nasruddin Amer, he said the airstrikes won't stop them and they'll retaliate. Another one, Mohammed Abdulsalam, he called Trump's claims about threats to international shipping totally false.
So Iran's saying they're not involved and the Houthis are still defiant. What else did AP report about the airstrikes?
They gave some details about where they hit. They said one strike hit a residential neighborhood in Sana'a in the north. Apparently, there were Houthi military facilities there, as well as a political headquarters. People who lived there said they heard huge explosions. And they also reported on strikes in the Damar province.
So they hit a lot of different targets all across Yemen. Okay, lastly, what did the Jerusalem Post have to say?
They said that U.S. F-16s and F-18s shot down 11 Houthi drones on Sunday. That's the day after the main airstrikes. And they quoted a U.S. official who said none of the drones got anywhere near the USS Harry S. Truman. So again, that backs up what the U.S. military is saying about successfully intercepting them. They also said the military tracked a Houthi missile that failed and crashed into the water, but it wasn't a threat. And then, Houthi sources on their TV network claimed that the U.S. Air Force attacked the command post of a ship they captured, the Galaxy Leader.
So more confirmation about those drone interceptions, and the Houthis are saying the U.S. attacked one of their ships. Well, it looks like we've covered a lot of ground here. We've learned about the initial airstrikes, the reactions from all sides, and some early analysis from the experts. It's definitely a complicated situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to sum things up, we've talked about those U.S. airstrikes ordered by President Trump, the different reports about how many people were killed or hurt, the Houthi claims of retaliation and their promise to keep going, and what the experts are saying about how this might play out. It's still too early to say if these attacks will actually work or what will happen in the long run.
Thanks for walking us through all that. And for those of you listening, if you found this discussion informative, please share it with others. And don't forget to subscribe to the Chained Opinion podcast and leave your comments with your thoughts and questions. You can also find us on YouTube Music and Spotify if you prefer listening to us there.
And as you think about everything we've talked about, consider this. The Middle East has a long history of conflict, and this situation is really tense. What do you think will happen next? And what could this mean for the region and for global shipping in the long term? It's definitely something to think about.